So the next poem that I read was Thanks by Yusef Komenyakaa. This whole poem is about a Vietnamese or a soldier in Vietnam um, that is a soldier for the U.S. Army, and he is thanking God for all the times that he's been alive through all of these battles. And he constantly references nature and how he's thankful for nature being there to protect him from a sniper's bullet or from a ricochet of a gun. And well, we thought anyway that he had to be talking to God because God is the
Right.
only one that could be responsible for
Right.
that.
When he's talking about thanks for the tree, thanks for the grass, um, and thanks for things in nature. There's only one person who could do things like that. It's God. It's no other people. So that just kind of clarifies who he's thanking in the poem.
Yeah, and he's also pretty vague about it also because he wants the reader to realize who he's talking about, and he constantly repeats, I don't know, who this voice is that's telling me what foot to put down first. And, when you think about it, it can only be God for that part. So another thing that he mentions, I noticed that he contrasts nature and guns throughout this poem. So, like, the power of nature and God versus man-made objects like guns are normally connotated negatively. So, like, giving his negative view on the war. Also, he also does some foreshadowing also about when he was back home in the U.S. And it said, I was back in San Francisco wrapped up in a woman's wild colors. So this one talks about, like, how he was back home and then he caused some dark bird's love call to be shattered by daylight. So I just thought that was interesting that when he was saying, I took it as maybe, like, his ignorance about the war caused like more harm to him.
And when I read it, I saw it as that, but I also saw it as maybe it goes with the line right before that about the woman's wild colors.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe since he was wrapped up in her arms, maybe they had a certain love for each other, and so maybe she was the dark bird. Contrasted dark. Maybe he like her wild colors, but also maybe her dark side, where she's the dark bird with her love call.
Yeah. So that could have been like a flashback when he was in there and he was thinking about a loved one maybe when he was in the war. Also, I noticed that a lot of the times he uses daylight in a negative way, which you wouldn't think of that. Like, the dark bird, again, is shattered by daylight. And he also says, there was something in here about a sun. It said, I don't know why the intrepid sun touched the bayonet. So I took it as, like, the sun was a symbol of the U.S. during the war because a lot of the times people thought, like, the U.S. was going to go in there to save the day. But then a lot of the people at home realized that, maybe the Vietnam wasn't a good.
There was no reason for them to.
So it said, like, I don't know why the sun would touch the bayonet. I don't know why the U.S. would go into war about this. And also, I tied the U.S. into, he mentions a vague white flower. He says, thanks for the vague white flower that pointed to the gleaming metal. So I took it as a white flower. I looked up, like, the symbol and what that meant. And that's normally, like, a good omen or, like, a symbol of, like, luck and purity. But I noticed that he used, like, the adjective vague. So, although people thought, like, the U.S. was a good symbol, they might have had another side.
A clean slate kind of going into it, like, nobody knew what was going to happen. It was a vague outlook on They had a vague outlook on what their plan was in Vietnam during the time and in the battle.
Yeah, and it was pointed toward a gleaming metal, which we can assume is a gun, just like the sun is pointed next to the gun also. And then it also says, reflecting how it is to be broken like mist over the grass. And there's also a lot of imagery that's like mist, like it's cloudy and vague and unclear. Just maybe like the U.S.'s intentions to go into the war and then the outcome. Like no one knew whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. Right. And like you can see the struggle at home too. Mm-hmm. And this kind of ties into Komenyakaa's background because he worked closely with soldiers in the war. Wasn't he? He wrote about the war.
Right? He was involved. Wrote for the U.S. about the war and wrote some articles and different things and wrote poems about the war and his experiences like within everything he saw, everything he heard about.
Yeah, so during this time he might have like realized that although they might have gone into it with good intentions, it might not have turned out that way. I also found it interesting that they used blind gods. They said, as we played some deadly game for blind gods. I again took this like the blind gods to be the U.S. or like the leaders of the U.S. They were blind to what was actually going on in the Vietnam War, while the soldiers were used as kind of like chess pieces, like kind of like they had to play the deadly game, which was the Vietnam War.
Right, and when I read that, I kind of saw it as played some deadly game for blind gods. Maybe they were in Vietnam and they were playing with God's plan and they were playing with what God wanted to do, and he's blind because they have they have no clue. They don't see what his
outcome would be.
intentions are for the war and what they're doing in Vietnam.
And also, they also use a lot of references to actually what was going on in Vietnam at the time. They mentioned anarchy, which is what caused it, and it said like the anarchy of dust. And they also mentioned a monarch several times, and it said, "What made me spot the monarch writhing on a single thread tied to a farmer's gate?" I found this ironic because normally you would think that a monarch is above the farmer, and this one, the monarch is vulnerable and is like the farmer's in control, which would show like the Vietnamese soldiers that was an uprising against the man, like the monarch. And he also says like an unfingered guitar string. This ties back because he was in he influenced by jazz and music back home.
In Louisiana with his culture, the way.
So this one's showing like maybe like the Vietnam War is like that, like it's useless, like there's no point to it.
It's kind of like it's an outside reference to kind of bring in the way he thought of it.
Yeah. And after that, he continues to say, like, I don't know why I was saved. I don't know. But then he changes, like, there's a fulcrum at the end. It says, but I know that something stood among the lost trees and moved only when I moved. So he knew that God's presence was still there with him.
Right. That he knew that he was being helped.
Yeah, like whatever decisions he would make, God would always be there to support him.
From the beginning, it was kind of like a negative tone connotation with all the different words and bullet and everything that was happening to him, and he said, I don't know. He didn't know what was happening, but at the end he says he knows that there was a reason for it and why it happened.
Yeah, like he might have learned something during the Vietnam War too.
And and also one other thing I saw is he continues to repeat thanks for, and at the same time he keeps saying thanks for I don't know. So if you put those two together, thanks for I don't know, like he doesn't know what he's thanking them for, but he's still thanking them.
And at the end he realizes
he knows what he's thanking them for.
Yeah, for having all those experiences. So. Oh man.